Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for joining us at Three Small Rooms. Once again, it is Matt from Risk Diversity, Andrew from Clarity Enabled, and myself, Dave, from Semisphere. And this week, we want to talk about something that is seen as really important from a safety point of view and a risk and a cultural point of view, which is having conversations about safety and risk. And so this is one of these ones where it's not a problem to have conversations, but what we do see when looking at it from that social psychological lens is where it can be derailed and go wrong, and you can have some unexpected consequences. One of the takes, and the thing I'll share with you, is where I see it, organisations, because they've done so much work systemizing, and systems are the kind of the default solution, that they then, when they want to promote conversations, go to a systems solution. And so what we see is KPIs, for example, and procedures that say you must have a conversation and you must do visits and you've got to measure them, and then suddenly they're being tracked. And so I'm sure many people listening have experienced where as soon as you start to measure something and put KPIs, it just puts pressure on quality and quantity. And what we see are these compromises and trade-offs starting to come into organisations where people are going out and doing them just for the sake of it, and they become meaningless, and then it obviously derails everything. So that's certainly one of the things I see. I think, Andrew, you've sort of got a take that's more about probably do people even know how to have a conversation? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, two things I'd add to that, I guess. Yes, number one, there are discrete skills to have an effective conversation, and also around observation and listening as well. I think the other outcome of a systemized kind of approach is very often, and I've fallen into this trap myself, if we're in the safety team or if I'm corporate, we go out with the mindset of, in the first place, or it is about telling the workforce what are the hazards, how do we need to manage them. So really what we're aiming to achieve, should be aiming to achieve, is to get input from the workforce back to us more so. So there's this whole part of the skill sets I'll touch on briefly, and Matt will add to this, is around skilled conversations, observations, listening, is, well, how do we get better engagement? How do we suspend our own agenda? How do we ask open questions to facilitate input back and from the workforce and build some trust? Realise there is some, from a social psychology perspective, would say whether we recognise it or not, there can be power differences. The workforce will pick up on that very quickly. If they think you've got any kind of agenda, or you're not really opening to listening to what they're going to say, that can affect the response and the outcome we achieve from the process. So I'll hand over to Matt, but yeah, that would be my experience. It's hard to do. There is definitely skills around observation, conversation, listening.
Yeah, so how do we get there? How do we find ourselves with good conversations, meaningful conversations, conversations where we can actually find some solutions to some of the problems that we've got going on, not just how do we more efficiently refuel whatever piece of plant it is on the site that we've got. We need to start talking about people, even about the goals that we've got, going into higher order goals, not just the easy ones where we count them numerically, but goals that aren't measurable, which is a really, really hard leap for some organisations. Everybody agrees that we'd like to have trust inside our workplace, but how do you measure trust? That's another ball of wax that we'll deal with in another conversation, trust, and other things like culture. But sticking with things that we can do, get away from those system thinkings, that they don't have to be the most efficient thing. Sometimes conversations aren't efficient, that they take time and to source that knowledge, to get the information out of the people that we can. We can use things like engagement boards, where we're actually mapping and plotting our problems and solutions. That is a direct influence from the guys that are working in the field, not from the person who's holding the conversation. We can create different artifacts like the engagement board. Listening skills, these things can actually be taught. There's so many organisations that I've seen that have promoted people into a supervisory level where they actually haven't had any training at all in leading people. So that can be a backwards going. And then listening skills, and listening skills. If you want to have a great conversation, they usually start with a question and involve the questioner listening.
I just it just reminded me of one little story there, and we'll try and finish up on this. Of, you know, you see the whether it's a safety person or a manager or a supervisor come back from being out on site all day, and they say to their boss, "I got nothing done today. I've just been talking to people all day." And that immediate response of like, well, that was a waste of time versus, hang on, that's your job. You know, even that, right, is such a crucial difference around what are we actually trying to achieve here, and what do we want about it. But that's a bit of that cultural angle that, again, we'll tackle anywhere else. We might call it there, boys. I think another little short and sharp one, but some really interesting ideas there. Conversations are fantastic. It's always just that implementation, which is a little bit tricky, but there's skills, there's some things we can do around it. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.